The Eagles batter the New York Giants. The Cowboys survive a scare. And Brock had a Purdy little start right there. It's our Week 14 NFL rundown. Welcome back to the Richie Hicks Jr. Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Richie, here with my good friend, Mr. Mike Zappi. Oh, man. Why am I even remotely smiling? I guess it's because the Giants got some necessary help after getting mauled. We're going to start this up in East Rutherford, New Jersey. The title says it all, a giant massacre. Quarterback Daniel Jones was sacked twice in the first 5 plays of the game, which essentially set the tone of what kind of day it was going to be for the Giants O-line and for the Giants skill position players. Got to tip my hat to the Philadelphia Eagles. I didn't necessarily think we were going to win yesterday, but I certainly didn't think that they were going to be able to have their way in every facet of the game, which they essentially did. Special teams, defense, offense. Quarterback Jalen Hurts, with the exception of getting sacked a couple of times by Azeez Ojulari, who was one of our few bright spots, just really an ugly performance on so many levels. And, this is where Brian Dable is going to start hearing the whispers with a very tough New York media, not getting his guys ready for him. In a lot of people's eyes, a must win. But coupled with a Seahawks loss, the Giants managed to not fall in the playoff bracket. They fell immediately after the game, but then reclaimed the 7th spot at day's end. As far as Philadelphia goes, we have spoken on recent shows saying how it seemed like other teams were starting to close in on them, even in defeat. But if you look at their last 2 meetings, it looks like Philly has cleaned up a lot of that. And as much as it pains me to say this, they are the best team in the NFL right now. It's not just the record. They are right now. Somebody needs to knock them off the mountain. But until then, when people, myself included, talk about the Cowboys or the 49ers as imminent threats to the Eagles, it's all speculative until it happens. But Giants have a huge game in D.C. coming up this week. I just read an article from the New York Times. Giants' victory gives them a 91% chance to make the playoffs, where a loss would give them a 38% chance. On the flip side, Washington more or less would have the same kind of trajectory. But that's all I got here. Zappy, what are your thoughts on just this showing by Philly and also what the Giants are looking at in the immediate future?
Well, honestly, Philly, they won at the most important part of the field, and that was in the trenches. Getting 260-plus yards rushing, and then for their defensive line to account for 7 sacks, as well as your leading rusher was Tyrod Taylor with 40 yards rushing. I think it goes to show that, that defensive and offensive front by the Eagles controlled the game. They controlled the line. They punched you. They punched fast. You talked about how there was 2 sacks in the first 5 dropbacks by Daniel Jones. It's not a good showing at all. It's a great showing by Philly, and it's showing yet once again how dangerous Philly is. This week they relied on the running game, and Jalen Hurts didn't have to do too much, whereas last week it was their passing game, and the running game was okay, and the week before that, they go for 350 yards rushing. So, Philly is showing who they are right now. As far as the Giants, it's going the way I thought it was going to go. This team continues to be the Giants team that I think a lot of people have been waiting for. And, that was a bad showing yesterday. That was a bad showing. I expected it to be a little more competitive by the Giants, but that was a bad showing by them. I'll leave it at that.
I do want to make a quick mention, piggybacking off of what you said. 3 key guys that weren't playing yesterday. I am hoping that we get a couple back for this Washington game. Leonard Williams, that's a short-term thing. I think he comes back next week. It would be a little more of a stretch for X-Man as well as Adoree Jackson to return. But when I look at what the Giants defense did prior to those two injuries, talking about Dory Jackson and Xavier McKinney, versus now, it is just so blatantly obvious how bad the absence of their starting safety as well as their cornerback one are affecting everything going on in that secondary. I think Fabian Moreau's doing an admirable job, but it's a big ask. Darnay Holmes has been getting cooked ever since he's had to take on a bigger role. It's not even fair to him. That's not what he does. And Wink Martindale has not been able to get that same magic out of his defensive unit that he had in the first half of the year. I do think that there are variables. It has to do with who you're playing. It has to do with a tougher schedule. But I do think that these injuries are really affecting the Giants. And I'll go as far as saying that I also think Saquon Barkley probably shouldn't have played yesterday. I don't think that he was healthy enough to play. I think he tried to do right by his team. But to Quinton's point from our previous show, I do think that in this Washington game and during the stretch run, it would behoove the Giants to start implementing some more Gary Brightwell and some more spelling of Saquon, not just because of the stinger that Saquon is trying to get through, but just fresher legs. The Giants need to pull from any bit that they could on the creativity level, the play calling level. I just want to reiterate to Giant fans that are disgusted about yesterday's events. Yeah, it was ugly, but do I think the Giants are as bad as it looked? Not necessarily. I think Philly's that good, and I think that's something that I want to reiterate. We have an opportunity against a team that most of us feel we should have beat a couple of weeks ago, that we ended up tying. It's our season. We win. We probably will find our way into the playoffs. This is the game coming up, and we're going to do a detailed preview of that as the week moves along. Anything else you got on this before we slide it along to the battle in Texas?
No, I mean, you hit on it. I think the most important thing for the Giants is your offensive line needs to play better.
Yeah, no question.
Because going to Washington to play against that defensive front, it's going to be fun. The Giants are, I don't want to say the season is lost. It does come down to this week. There's a couple little things that they need to fix defensively and offensively. Both of it being on the lines. I think they have a lot of film to watch this week. Let's put it that way, because if there's a team to get you ready for a defensive front like Washington's would be Philly. So
I'm optimistic that they could recover from this beating. I think it's quite humbling, but I also do believe that the Giants outplayed Washington 2 short weeks ago. I don't necessarily think the home advantage is big either way. Historically, even in the Daniel Jones era, the Giants have gotten the better of the Washington football team, the Redskins, now the Commanders. It's going to be a damn good game. I'm happy that it got slotted to primetime because I think it's going to be worth it. I think the Giants are going to show that they deserve to be on TV. This is a soul check week. It's time to really dig deep, and we're going to find out a lot about the heart of the guys in that locker room. And I do have faith in this coaching staff to get them ready for that task. Out in Dallas, Arlington, Texas, this was a scare. Houston Texans, 1-10-1 going in, had absolutely nothing to play for. Even draft position could have been messed with. But you know what? Got to tip my hat to Lovie Smith's team. They showed up. They showed a lot of pride. And when you couple that with a Dallas team that's just been pounding people left and right, I do think that this kind of game was due, where they were going to come out a little flat. And we said it off air. It is not easy to get up for a game like this when you're used to playing other teams that are, basically statement games. A few weeks back, Dallas and the Giants broke ratings records for the most watched football game regular season wise ever. They had a showdown with Minnesota that the beating was so bad they took it off TV. Dallas has been used to playing upper echelon teams that people are paying attention to. So I do believe that in that regard, if I'm a Dallas fan, I'm not overly concerned about coming out flat. You talk about watching film. This is another case where you got to watch film. And, oddly enough, the Houston Texans, who are having just a terrible season, played the New York Giants, the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Dallas Cowboys all rather well. So you do have to tip your hat to Houston for that. And you brought to my attention about Driscoll, playing well against your team. But, Houston took a chance not taking the points. I understand both sides of it. They gave Dallas a long field and said, okay, you got to beat us. And Dallas did just that. I did think that the hit on Michael Gallup in the end zone might have forced the game into overtime, but Dallas recovered after that play, was able to punch it in. I think they showed a lot of resolve. It's not easy to be flat, come out, you're in a dogfight, and then all of a sudden you got to put together a very long drive, their second longest drive of the season, if I'm not mistaken, in order to win that game. And they did that. So now it's clean up the mental errors and make sure that you're finishing, because even going back to that Indy game, you guys were kind of sleepwalking until you woke up. And you can afford to do that against some of the AFC South teams. And you got another challenge at Jacksonville this week, but that's not going to work against the 49ers. That's not going to work against some of these other teams, the Eagles. So, Dallas gets a big win, because if they lost, Philly was really close to clinching this division. Now it's still within striking distance for the Cowboys.
Yeah, I got to tip my hat off to Lovie Smith. Coming into this game, all he kept getting questioning about was, how does it feel to be 17-point underdogs to the Dallas Cowboys? Or what's your opinion on the spread of the game? And it seemed like he got annoyed by it. But at the same time, Lovie Smith is still one of the greater defensive coaches we've seen. So when you hear the media talking about spreads and playing one of the high-profiled offenses that Dallas has been since Dak came back, you tend to get your team ready. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I think that game, the way the game started, it seemed like it was going to be another blowout. But then when Kevontae Turpin fumbled that punt return,
that was big.
That was huge. And I think that actually changed the game around completely, because it seemed like Dallas was in their own groove, and that threw them out of their groove, and they weren't able to recover from that after that point, And I go back to it. If he doesn't fumble that ball, I think Dallas runs away with this game. So
you may very well be right. Sometimes it literally just takes an unfortunate play like that could really just change the trajectory of a game.
Yeah, and I'm happy this game happened, because you keep hearing about, in regards to the Colts game, well, Philly had to come back and win that game late, whereas Dallas blew them out, and it looked better for the Eagles because they had to see what their quarterback can do with the time allotted to come back and win that game. Dak had less time, had a longer field to go down, and he put that team on his back, and he led us to a comeback victory, And so it's the good teams are always going to find a way how to win the bad games, and this is one of those games.
Will find a way
to lose.
And I was laughing when you guys made the comeback, because when I saw how Driscoll ran the wrong way on that option play, I was like, man, this is why you dudes are 1-10-1, soon to be 1-11-1. That's why you guys are a one-win team. It's stuff like that. That's what separates winners from losers. But shout out to Lovie Smith for getting his guys ready. And also a shout out to Dak Prescott, because no, he did not have the cleanest game. But when you're able to get your guys down the field, it kind of washes away the ugly performance all in all, because that wasn't what we expect from Dak. We expect a little more, but a win's a win, and a win they will take. We're going to move it along to this. We had an interesting storyline here. As many know, Tom Brady grew up a San Francisco 49ers fan and was actually in attendance for the famous Dwight Clark catch against your Cowboys before both our times. Point to be made, and where I'm going with this is I expected more out of Tampa given Brady's intensity of what that organization, the 49ers, mean to him. Not to mention that, Brock Purdy made his first NFL start. This is the biggest disparity in terms of how many starts the two starting quarterbacks have had in the history of the NFL. Not surprised by the outcome. I'm surprised by the score. Tampa does not look like a team that deserves to be in the playoffs, but in a very poor NFC South, it looks like they might very well get in. There's still time left. As far as the game goes, similar to what I saw in the Giant game, to be honest, where I feel that the 49ers just really imposed their will early and were essentially able to do whatever they needed to do to move the ball, to get key third down stops, and to force Tampa to be one-dimensional. And I think that's the kind of football that the 49ers are going to bring to the playoffs and why they are a Super Bowl contender, whether Jimmy G comes back or not. I think the kind of system that they run, I don't think the quarterback could necessarily hurt them as long as they stick to what they do great, which is run the football, play stingy defense. And honestly, they just don't make a lot of mistakes. They are well coached, and they have an excellent play caller and also an excellent defensive coordinator, and that's what makes them such a damn good team. The San Francisco 49ers, if you even look at recent history, making it to multiple title games, almost winning a Super Bowl a few years back. This is a team that has been very close to getting it done. And I would have to say that this playoffs, regardless of who's at quarterback, they have as good a chance as anyone. And even with the Debo injury, you have Christian McCaffrey, you have Brandon Ayuk, you have George Kittle, who's not having statistically his kind of year, but still an excellent blocker plus an excellent tight end. So this is a team that nobody really wants to play. And with the Viking loss, which we're going to hit on in a few moments, the 49ers are approaching the potential 2 seed. And if as a Giant fan, and I've said this before, if we're lucky enough to even get in, I certainly don't want to play these guys in round 1. I would much rather take my chances against Minnesota. But yeah, man, I looked at this game and I said, why is Tom Brady coming back next year? I don't see that he has much left. I don't necessarily think a change of address is going to change that. I understand that this isn't the same team that won a Super Bowl in 2020, but when I look at that Buccaneer roster, even with the flimsy O-line, I expect more. I think this speaks volumes on a lot of things. I don't think Todd Bowles should be the head coach. I feel that he was an excellent defensive coordinator. I was actually a little surprised that when Arians won upstairs that they didn't go to Byron Leftwich. Right. The relationship that Byron and Tom have is a very good one. And I feel that he would have been the right choice. Either way, should Brady play next year, I don't think he's going to be a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. I actually believe that he may very well go back to New England. And there is that possibility, maybe, that the team that whipped him yesterday could be in his future. I know that he's always wanted to be a 49er. But my gut tells me next year, Tom Brady's going to be a New England Patriot.
I swear, if 25 years down the road, we're looking back and saying, man, remember that game Brock Purdy had against Tom Brady?
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And it's funny how those things work because Tom Brady was pretty much an unknown when he got his first career win against the great Peyton Manning. And then that became one of the most iconic rivalries in NFL history.
Yeah, and I swear we're going to be looking back at it and we're going to see Brock Purdy with 8 Super Bowl wins, and it's all going to go back to
you never know,
because he was the first quarterback to making his first career start versus Tom Brady and to win the game.
It is eerily similar when you think about it. It's eerily similar to the events of the 2001 season.
It is, but at the same time, this 49ers team is built to protect the quarterback. I like the way Purdy looked. Don't get me wrong. But this is the best defense in football.
I would have to agree.
Yesterday, for the way they came out and shut down Tom Brady in that offense, even though Tom Brady in that offense has not been playing great as of late, that defense imposed their will.
I would give you guys a slight edge on Dallas for the second best on Philly. Even though Philly does tend to struggle against the run, as you guys have had your occasional slips against the run, I would say Dallas 2, Philly 3, and I'm not looking at stats. I'm just talking about the eye test. But those are my top 3, in my opinion.
Yeah, those are definitely the top 3 teams. And, the 49ers are taking a big loss with Deebo Samuel because now we're going to put a lot on the guy you went all in for, and that's Christian McCaffrey, the same guy who has come off back-to-back seasons full of injuries.
Yes.
So in a Kyle Shanahan run offense, that's a lot to put on him, especially
it's going to be demanding.
It's going to be very demanding on him. So it almost hope that these last 4 weeks of the season it doesn't come back and bite them in the ass. But I've got to tip my hat off to this 49er team. I mean, they look dangerous. They're hitting on all strides. I still want to see what they look like after this Thursday. If the 49ers come out and just absolutely embarrass Seattle, then I'm sold on this team being able to make it to the Super Bowl with Brock Purdy. But if Seattle comes out and wins this game and they defeat Brock Purdy mentally, then I'm not sold on Brock Purdy yet.
I'll be very honest with you. I like the 49ers going in. I'll give you a quick thought on that going in early. Obviously, I need the 49ers. I want the 49ers to win because it helps the Giants' playoff hopes. As a Giant fan, the 2 games that I'm going to be honing in on this week, in addition to our Sunday night battle, the Jets hosting the Lions. The Lions are very hot. A Lion loss could really dismantle their playoff hopes, or at least make it a little tougher. And after what I saw with the Seattle Seahawks coming out flat at home against the Carolina Panthers, it's a very hard sell for me to believe that the 49ers aren't going to do something similar to them, if not worse. I think Geno Smith, even though it's been a cool little story, is starting to show some warts, making some mistakes. But ultimately, there's a couple of other things at play here. The loss of Kenneth Walker is massive to Seattle. Not to mention that they had their issues getting off the field on third downs. Sam Darnold, got to give him credit. He played a good game. And I must admit that Carolina's interim head coach, if I'm the GM, this is a guy that I want to retain because he's instilling a pride back in that organization, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And in a very watered down NFC South, these guys still have a chance to win that division. And they already whipped Tampa once this year earlier, and that was actually with P.J. Walker, because quarterback's been a revolving door in Carolina between Baker Mayfield, P.J. Walker, and now Sam Darnold. Looks like he's getting a chance to get it back. But a good first step for Sam Darnold, and that's their first road victory since last season. So that was massive for Carolina's confidence going into the final stretch. And it was a huge blow to the Seattle Seahawks because Seattle's next too. They're playing the 49ers and the Chiefs. They may very well fall out of it. And that's why, despite my Giants sliding, I still have a high confidence that we can still make the playoffs because of the difficulty of what Seattle has in front of them and the fact that we still control our own destiny. But time will tell on that. But yeah, I like the 49ers moving forward in just about every matchup they face.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember how I brought up the point about the 49ers and you look at the schedule for the rest of the season, and this was about 3 weeks ago where majority of their games were at home. And this is their last test of the year, whereas Seattle, it almost seems like Seattle is going to be battling for that number 7 seed.
Indeed.
And they're going to be battling the loser of this Sunday's night's game for that 7th seed. The winner should coast into the 6th spot.
And that's why this is so freaking important. I like, but once again, going in, December football on prime time, this late in the year, approaching Christmas, as a fan, can I really ask for any more, even if lately it's been very frustrating? Year 1, new regime, no cap space, a lot of warts all over that roster, but we're still in the mix. That's all I could ask for. Kudos to my coaching staff. Thank you for giving us something to watch this late in the year.
There you go. Yeah, and going back to Seattle, the one good thing about them is they still have Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. They still have offensive players that can make noise. And where I'm not going to give my prediction for Thursday night's game right now, but Seattle has some things they need to fix, but I believe they can fix them. And then this is a division game. And
Oh, for
Seattle and
sure.
San Francisco always shows up. They're always close. So I think anything can happen this Thursday night. Detroit, man, is the team that it's like they've been on one of the teams to watch the last couple of weeks, and
I
now
just
they're
moved it
right
over there. Yeah. I'm going to ask you the question. 34-23 victory for the Lions yesterday. Charles Woodson on the pregame show, amongst some of the other guys from Fox on the panel, were kind of visibly irked and irritated. Why is Minnesota underdogs? They got 10 wins, and this is why.
Yeah.
Paper Tigers. I've been saying this for the better part of a month, if not longer. I genuinely believe that the Minnesota Vikings are one of the most fortunate 10-win teams I have ever seen in my life. I do not have a huge amount of confidence in what they do. When you look at them on paper, you're like, damn, they're so talented. You got Adam Thielen, who's having a little bit of a renaissance over the past month. Justin Jefferson, probably the best receiver in the game. Kirk Cousins is capable, but I don't see him as the dude. And of course, you have Dalvin Cook. There's a lot of talent on that team. But this is the one thing that stands out to me with Minnesota. Every week that they've been up for a legitimate test, whether you go back early against Philly, whether you look at the Dallas game on a big spotlight, or most recently here with the Lions should have swept this team. That's number one. If you go back to the first meeting, Detroit let them off the hook.
Shoot, Braxton Berrios let them off the hook last week.
Indeed.
You know,
they could have lost that
team.
game as well. Indeed. And the Jets, whether they get in or not, have made some serious strides. Shout out to their head coach, Robert Saleh. We're going to be hitting on them next. But I guess my question here, Zappy, are the Vikings a pretender with that record, taking advantage of a very poor year from Green Bay, which is not the norm? The Bears in a legitimate rebuild, but they're starting to finally find their identity. And now you have a Lions team that's very hot. And Dan Campbell is finally reaping the rewards of what he's been selling for the last 2 years. You know, Detroit Lions could slide in through the back door and get into the playoffs. That is a possibility. They have a big test this week against those same Jets you just mentioned. But I guess, my question here, is Minnesota a pretender?
Yes, 100%. I mean,
not to mention it took an ungodly catch plus the fumble from Josh Allen to beat Buffalo. Buffalo played like pure ass and still almost won that game.
They are the one thing going for them is they play in the division they play in. So
absolutely,
where it's to the point now where they've had multiple tests, like you said. Dallas, Philly, and now Detroit, where these are three possible playoff teams.
Indeed.
And then they still have to play the Giants in a couple of weeks. I think they are pretenders, but because Detroit made that surge late, I think they're going to hold on to the division. But no, I'm just right now, Minnesota doesn't sell me whatsoever. They've been lacking on the defensive side all year.
I want to pause you one moment, Zappy. Good friend of the show, Mr. Omar Pinto. I like this question. It's off topic, but I like it. What are our thoughts on MLB $8, $9, $11 million contracts? Like, in other words, the years, I'm assuming, compared to other sports like the 1 to 5 contracts in the NBA and NFL, big difference in contract lengths. Omar, in my opinion, I think because there's so many levels of baseball when you're coming up, whether it's be single A, double A, once you can kind of pass through double A, I think you're more or less destined to be in the bigs at some point. But to answer your question, I think because of the financial road that it takes to get there until you finally make the real money, like you take the reigning AL MVP Aaron Judge, who went to arbitration, was still on a rookie deal. There's many other stories similar to his. By the time these baseball players reach that superstardom, they want to get it not only in how much they're making a year, but they want that length, because the reality in baseball is that is your one true contract. And I think that's why that's been the trend versus other sports where a lot of NBA players, for instance, they're very friendly with one another and they actually go over contracts together to kind of see, when can I dip out and I could hook up with you and play. And I think there's a little more of that because the NBA, I think we could probably say, is more of a, how would you say, a one-man show in the sense that in baseball, you could be the best pitcher in the world, but if you don't get no run support, it don't matter. Or you could be an MVP like an Aaron Judge, but if they walk you constantly because you have no support in your lineup, I guess the point to be made is that's the difference.
Well, I also think one of the big differences between the three sports is the fact that baseball doesn't have a salary cap. So because
that's another
of that,
good point. I like that.
They rely so heavily on the market. That's why we see the same teams year in and year out. The Yankees, the Dodgers, the Red Sox spending the amounts of dollars that they spend on to retain a free agent or bring him over from a different team. Whereas in the NFL and NBA, you have salary caps, and they're there for that exact reason. Because if not, we would still be seeing Dallas win year in and year out because Jerry would fork out the money to
similar
be able to get
what
the guys.
Steinbrenner did in the '90s with the Yankees.
Exactly. So I think that's what a big thing is about it is just it's the contracts. In the NFL, the salary goes up every few years. Baseball, it's always going to be the market value. So it's easier to give the 8 to 10 year contracts in baseball, whereas in football, the 3, 4, 5 years has a lot to do with how the salary cap increases annually by 10 million, but we're expecting a large jump once the new TV deal goes into play. So that's where I think is the big one, where the NBA has that little bit of luxury with the luxury tax, but they still have a salary cap they have to follow. Baseball, it's just because they don't have the salary cap. I think that's the big reason why.
And one thing I want to hit on before we move it along is with the luxury tax in Major League Baseball, I had this conversation with my good friend Richie Dorney the other day, super Mets fan, and he brought to me that they're going to be a lot more stringent and on top of these guys who are receiving the benefits of luxury taxes from the big dogs like the Dodgers, the Mets, the Yankees, etc., and kind of force them to do more for their team. Because one of the biggest annoyances in Major League Baseball is that these smaller market clubs do get some benefit off that luxury tax, but they don't filter it back into the team.
No, yeah.
And that has to stop because from a competitive level, and you take fans like a Milwaukee fan or a Pittsburgh fan, it's not right because those are some great fans. Cincinnati, the list goes on and on. Tampa has been the one anomaly that they managed to dance around this year in and year out with limited resources. So, big shout out to Kevin Cash Money. That dude is always in the mix for Manager of the Year and with good reason. But Omar, thanks, man. That's an awesome question, and we appreciate that question. We're going to be moving along to the AFC side of things. This was a physical battle yesterday. The Bills breaking even with the Jets after an earlier season loss in MetLife Stadium. This was a big win for the Bills, not the prettiest of wins, but they were able to jump in front. They were able to jump in front of the Miami Dolphins with their loss later in the day. The Bills are still not clicking on all cylinders. They're looking vulnerable. Brett, guy who's often on our show, made mention to me that similar to Green Bay over the years, he doesn't feel that this Buffalo team is built to win in the elements. And initially, I kind of scoffed at it and said, I don't know about that. But when I thought about it a little more, I said, something, Brett might be onto something here. Because we have spoken on this before, how Buffalo should have been in on CMC. They weren't exactly. And we were wondering if that could be something that comes back to bite them. Now, Dalvin Cook's younger brother, James, is starting to find his role in this offense. I'm going to tell Brett on air, freeze that guy. Next year might be the year to keep him. But I guess what I'm saying is, obviously, in that kind of inclement weather, the ball's going to sail. It happened yesterday. I think that Buffalo just did a little better job of dealing with those elements. But the New York Jets, they take on the attitude of their coach. It's us against the world. We can play with anybody. And even though they're coming off a couple of close losses, they're proving that they are not folding. And, taking the fan hat off, we share a stadium with this team. They are a little bit ahead of us right now. And that's nothing to be ashamed of because I feel that both our organizations are headed north and in the right direction. Mm-hmm. For sure. But, the Jets control their own destiny to a level, even though they kind of slipped out of the picture at the moment. And I still have a feeling the Jets are going to have their say on whether or not they get in. But yesterday, just a lot of sailing passes, a very physical game, man. Mike White in defeat, got to shout him out. He took a beating, but kept getting up, kept coming back. I think it shows a true staple of leadership. And this is a team that's looking for that leadership from the quarterback position, because Joe Flacco might have the leadership from a mental and emotional level, but he doesn't have it from a physical level anymore. That's why he's the backup. That's why he's the mentor. But when I look at Mike White and his attitude and his contagious, positivity versus the guy that he replaced, a guy that they overinvested in a Zach Wilson. And I'm looking at Josh Rosen 2.0. I said it before. Mike White, still learning, but he might be the guy, because one thing, this is a veteran. Some levels of this locker room have some serious veterans that are really embracing this Mike White. Then you have a sensational rookie like Sauce Gardner, who's, as we both predicted, potentially going to make Jet fans compare him down the road to Revis Island, Hall of Famer. Jets are in a very good place despite the loss. I'm more concerned about Buffalo's immediate future, because they're supposed to go to the Super Bowl this year. You lost Von Miller, got your fair share of issues. The defense is not as dominant as they were earlier in the year, and it's not just because of Von Miller. There's a lot of other variables. But in crunch time, can they put teams away? And that is a question of mine, and a legitimate one, I think.
Yeah, and I think we could look at every AFC team more than we could the NFC teams and find a lot more issues with them. You know what I want to see with this Jets team, and I'm going to tell you, I want to see them go after Lamar Jackson in the offseason.
Wow, that would be something. He might be the fit. He might be the fit.
Yeah, because you look at this Ravens team right now, they're winning their games, but they're not winning their games. And I think I would ask most Ravens fans, does Lamar Jackson deserve that contract similar to what Deshaun Watson got? The answer is going to be no, because of where they're at currently.
But isn't it crazy how those things work? Because you can make a logical argument, not even that logical, just like blunt force honesty, that he is the best quarterback they've ever had. Some people might argue Flacco.
Yeah, and well, I mean, Flacco's got the one ring, and I think if you're always, most arguments always go back to that. Well, who's
of course,
got more rings,
it is about winning at the end. It is about winning.
So, but imagine Lamar Jackson in this offense with a Breece Hall, a Garrett Wilson, who has been a phenomenal rookie receiver, and that defense with, and Robert Saleh. I think that's a perfect fit. And I think that's something that we should watch out for in the offseason, because I just don't think the Ravens are going to pay Lamar. I really don't. But I actually
agree with you on that one. And it's going to be interesting to see who throws their name in the Lamar sweepstakes, because it could be somebody that we don't expect.
Well, I think the two New York teams, for one, and the Giants and Jets make the most sense. The Giants were a team I thought that if they were going to make an in-season move, it would be for Lamar Jackson. But you guys got off to the 6-1 start, so it took you out of that conversation. But the Jets have fight, and they're going to fight every week this year. I don't think they're going to sneak into the playoffs. I think the Chargers are going to be coming along at the right time.
They have a shot.
So I that's too much to be asking for. And like I said with Mike White, he's going to give you that big week, which he did in his first start, and then his other weeks are going to be mediocre to he's a bridge quarterback, if that. So they're not going to make the Super Bowl with a Mike White. But one thing they know for sure moving forward is they need to address the quarterback position in the offseason.
Yeah, they're going to have to
through Lamar or something. Yeah,
they're going to have to trade Zach Wilson at some point. I think it's already a ruptured situation, and they know that they made a mistake. But the best thing about making a mistake is acknowledging it before it becomes too – it's getting to a point, in my opinion, where I don't even think the team wants him around. And I'm not just talking about starting. I'm talking about – I don't think he's doing anybody any favors even being around what they got going on right now.
No, he's this time. This is our Josh Rosen, our Johnny Manziel, our Baker Mayfield of this draft. This is what he is. It's not good at all. And I don't even think a change of scenery would change that, because of the way Steve Young said it. He has never had to take responsibility for anything
And
growing
that's a
up.
qualified opinion given their similar backgrounds.
Absolutely. So, Zach Wilson, the end is near in the Jets. But as far as Buffalo goes, I got to give more credit to Robert Saleh and the Jets than take away credit
They lost, and
the
I'm thinking
Bills.
more about what they did.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I'm more disappointed with this Bills team because we expected more out of players like Gabriel Davis, who hasn't exactly had a
Yes.
big year,
He
and
knows how to disappear.
he does. And
And where the hell is Dawson Knox? A lot of people thought
Dawson,
that he was going to be a top 10 tight end this year, and that hasn't been the case.
and it hasn't been the case. And the loss of Von Miller is also hurting this team. It's hurting them more
He's a
because
phenomenal player and a phenomenal leader.
yeah, so the Bills have a lot to worry about. And, when I sit down and I look at the Bills, the Chiefs, and the Bengals, we use those three as the top three in the AFC, at least in my opinion. I think it's those three teams.
Could be right.
You look at which team has the most glaring holes right now, and I would say it's probably the Bills because they don't have a number two receiver that's been consistently good week in and week out. The tight end has lacked. Losing your best edge rusher that you invested a lot of money in the offseason is out for the year. And you've had other injuries in your secondary all year. So I think the Bills are the ones that are lacking more things because there's too many question marks. You said James Cook is coming along. Yeah, he is. He's one of my keepers in one of my fantasy leagues. But he, to be the team that they are, where they rely so heavily on Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs, that catches up to you. You look at the Chiefs. I mean, you could point out a few things. They don't have a true, all-star number one receiver.
That's why that's the MVP in my eyes.
Exactly. But I think Jalen Hurts has slowly passed him over the last week or two.
And good friend of the show, Mr. Sergio Rodriguez, I'd like to get him back on because I definitely, when he gives his hot takes, it definitely forces me to do a lot of thinking. But I've noticed lately, I haven't necessarily agreed with a lot of his hot takes, but nonetheless, I think they're valuable opinions. And I would love to get him back on. Sergio recently on his show made mention of how he believes that Joe Burrow should be the MVP given the state of their O-line. Reason why I tend to disagree with Mr. Sergio is because I think the O-line has played much better, and I think that Joe Mixon performance a couple of weeks back, plus just the fact that Burrow's been a little cleaner, speaks to that. The reason why Mahomes is my choice is because he's doing it with the least talent in terms of what he has to throw to or who's healthy.
Positions, yeah.
But this is the thing about Buffalo and the number two receiver thing. Part of me believes that part of the problem with that whole not having a number two is their approach. And I think part of that is because before Josh Allen necessarily thinks of trusting a McKenzie or a Crowder or a Gabe Davis, he's already thinking about running and doing things in that regard. And I do think that they're a little top heavy in terms of their approach. And I think that top heavy approach could hurt them in a big playoff game. But to your point, Gabe Davis has struggled separating himself when you would think that when you have Stephon Diggs on the other side, life should be a little easier.
And it's crazy. We're talking about Buffalo's number two wide receiver. I talked about Dallas's second receiver. And yet we still have a guy that we say we don't want to talk about.
I'm going to put this up for a moment as you share that thought, just to kind of let the viewers know what happened over here. This isn't necessarily something that I'm like jumping a fence to talk about. All I want to say about this one is the Titans are not as good as people thought coming in. And I also think that their secondary is very poor. And I also think this speaks volumes to how Jacksonville is coming along and could be a legit factor, because I think we're seeing the true growth of a Trevor Lawrence, who early on a lot of people were like, damn, maybe this guy could be another overall number one bust. I don't tend to agree with that. I don't subscribe to that. I also want to share this one down here. The Ravens and Bengals, you just talked about the issues with the Ravens, even with winning. We talked a little bit about Burrow. I got to agree with you at this point, and I've been against the Bengals all year just because I like being right. But the more this thing progresses, it looks like, yeah, it comes down to the last week of the year, but the Bengals look like a more tight ship right now. You know, and even the whole Lamar thing, revisiting it again, I get that on a lot of levels. Yeah, that's a lot of money in this and that. But when I look at Huntley and like the ineptitude of their offense, I'm like, are you guys sure you really want to move on from Lamar? But then again, this offense was struggling with Lamar. So, you know, I've been saying this for years. When are they going to get this guy a number one receiver? He's a league MVP already. He's already a league MVP. He finally, you know, popped his playoff cherry getting a win. But it's like, I don't know, man. I don't think it's all fair, but I see both sides of it. And quite frankly, I don't really have an opinion either way that strongly. I'm kind of like everybody else as a fan that I'm going to sit back and see where this plays.
Yeah, I mean, if Tyler Huntley and Lamar Jackson are giving you the exact same thing, you're going to go with Tyler Huntley.
But I don't necessarily. I can't co-sign that off of a few starts here and there. I can't.
No, you can't. Well, I mean, even last year in Lamar's absence, Tyler Huntley looked pretty good.
He did. You know? And a lot of guys have replaced perennial Pro Bowlers, got big contracts, and then you're like, oh shit. You know, Matt Flynn was a good example of that. Brock Osweiler got some big time money because of that. We've seen it. We've seen the movie. We've seen how that plays out. We've seen it.
As far as wide receiver goes for them, I mean, yeah, that's what they drafted Rashad Bateman for, and he was coming along just fine this year in his second year in the league. You know, so it almost seemed like, all right, maybe they found it, but then of course he goes down to injury. I don't necessarily know if a number one receiver is going to help because of Greg Roman's offense. I don't think his offense really features a number one receiver.
You got to ask your questions about who do you want to invest in. Do you want to invest in the player and get the right teachers around him, or do you want to just go in a completely different direction? But it's hard for me to believe in a quarterback-driven league that keeping Lamar is not the answer. But the fact that it's been such a stalemate with both parties, it is looking eerie that Lamar may very well be gone. And we're going to move it along to two other dynamic young quarterbacks. I didn't like what I saw from Mike McDaniel yesterday. I feel that Rodney Harrison said it best. You got to run the football in these kind of situations, especially when Tyreek Hill is banged up, Waddle's kind of banged up. You're dropping back Tua constantly, and we all know about what Tua's been through this year. Got to give some credit to the Chargers, finally getting some health, looking like a more well-oiled machine on offense than the Dolphins last evening. And more importantly for the Chargers is that their defense really showed up in some key moments. But I also think that Miami didn't do themselves any favors by being a little too predictable. And Mike McDaniel, to be honest, truly, to Rodney Harrison's point, looked like a rookie head coach yesterday.
First, I got to send a shout out to Tyreek Hill, man. I mean, being the first player in NFL history to score by pretty much every virtue you can, and now to add a fumble return for touchdown, you know, like
he's got to kick an extra point.
He's got to kick an extra point, exactly, and he's got to account for a safety somehow. But yeah, I'm more impressed with the Chargers, the way they looked versus the Dolphins. I thought the Dolphins were going to come out and play a much better game.
That makes two of us.
I wonder if a lot has to do with Tyreek Hill right now, his lingering injuries. Jalen Waddle, he has not necessarily been the same the last couple weeks either. And also, I have to say, man, there was a couple of bad calls in that game that kind of changed the complexion of the game altogether. You had that roughing the quarterback on Phillips when he sacked. I mean, he sacked Justin Herbert, and they call a roughing the quarterback on that. I mean, that changed a lot of the game personally, and that's one of the biggest I've seen. From what I've seen, a lot of fans have been upset about that call, and it was a really bad call. I don't know how you want him to sack him at this point. You know, the Dolphins, they need to run the ball. You have Jeff Wilson and you have Raheem Mostert there for that exact reason. You need to run the ball. The inability to run the ball is, I believe, putting more on Tua, and he's not exactly looking like the Tua we saw earlier this year when they were running the ball, you know, and that's That's what it comes down to. Also, we're at that time of the year where you need to be running the ball, especially when you're getting ready for playoff football. Running the ball is so important. So Miami's got a couple things they need to do. Mike McDaniel needs to change it up. I don't know what's going on with him right now. I don't know what's going on with that offense. The defense did what they could do. I got to give credit to that Chargers team. They played great. They're in it. They're in it. You know, they were one of the teams a lot of people, including ourselves, picked to win the division. A lot of people had already written them off for the season, but they're still in it. And this is one of those teams that I don't think you want to see if they get into the playoffs, because they have a lot of the weapons there to succeed.
They could definitely make some noise, but I'm still not completely buying how far they could get should they get in, because at the end of the day, I still think some of their losses are huge and could ultimately ruin them. I did mention this earlier about the Seahawks squandering that great chance to stay in front of the NFC East third and fourth place teams. Carolina, got to give it to them. Wilkes deserves to be the coach, as far as I'm concerned. And Sam Darnold, it was nice to see him doing something positive for his immediate future. But with this loss, it kind of opens the door on this thing. Who's going to get the 6 and 7s? You got 4 teams vying for 2 spots. Giants and Commanders, winner of this coming week, you would have to think has the inside track to hold down one of the two. Now, of course, you have an upstart Lions team that is really coming from behind on everybody and trying to sneak in. And you have a Seahawks team who, in my opinion, is trending in the more negative position, where I believe that they're going to have a legitimate issue winning some of these upcoming games given the difficulty of their schedule. So my question to you, Mike Zappi, who's your 6 and who's your 7?
The Commanders and Seahawks.
You still got the Seahawks surviving this?
Yeah. I still have Seattle surviving this onslaught. I'm looking at schedules. Detroit's schedule is, they've got some games ahead of them. In order for them to make it, they have to win out. And I believe they can still have air for one more loss, but either way, that's a lot on them. And then, so it comes down to the Seahawks and the Giants for me, and I look at really their strength of schedule, and I trust Seattle slightly more than I trust the Giants. And a lot of it, while they do have to travel the next 2 weeks, San Francisco and Kansas City, their last 2 games are at home, very winnable games. And like I said, I do believe that they're going to give the Niners some problems. But then I look at the Giants, have to play the Commanders, have to play the Vikings, the Colts, and the Eagles one last time, where I still believe that week 18 is we're not going to see Dallas or Philly resting their starters, especially if Dallas wins next week. Then it's a 1-game lead where Philly can't afford to rest starters, neither can Dallas. So the Giants have a rough schedule where I only see them winning one of their remaining games. So that's what it boils down to me. I think that tie is going to come back and hurt them rather than help them. And it's going to be because I see them winning 1 game where I see Seattle winning 2 more. And that will be the difference. And Commanders, I believe they will have the upper end this week. And that's why they get the 6th seed, because obviously the winner of the Giants-Commanders game should coast right to the 6th seed.
The Seahawks currently have, correct me if I'm wrong, 6 losses, correct?
Yeah.
Well, this is my spin on this. They have a tiebreaker over both the Commanders and the Giants should it come down to that. And while I'd be the first to tell you that as early as a few days ago, that tie has been all over me and pissing me off, this is how I see this playing down. You made a good point about how Seattle has a little softer of a finish and how the Giants don't have any easy ones down the stretch. I mean, Philadelphia, even if they were to rest starters, that's not a guaranteed victory just given the depth of their team. But there's the thing. Whoever should win this particular week with the Commanders and Giants, I'm going to tip my hat and tell you who I think is going to win. My point to be made is this. Even if the Giants only win 2 more games this year, which the best possibility would be win the Commander game, win the Indy game, 9-7-1 beats 9-8. Seattle loses their next 2 games. They have 8 losses. 9-7-1 beats 9-8. That's why it's so imperative that the Giants win this week. But on the flip side, that's where the tiebreaker hurts you. with the loss to Seattle if you don't beat Washington this week, because then you're literally going to probably be the 8 team as opposed to the 7. The winner, I'm just going to go on record and say it now. The winner of Sunday night's game will be in the playoffs. But I'm also going to say this. Even if the Giants beat the Commanders this week, I still got the Commanders being 6 and the Giants being 7. But I do think that the win potentially for the Giants this week will get them into the playoffs, in my opinion, the 7 seed. Last thing we're going to talk on quickly, OBJ's immediate future. Does he have to take less to play this year? More importantly, is he ready?
Well, I mean, is he ready? No, I think we already know that it's going to be about 5 more weeks before he's game ready. And that means week 18 or wild card round, unless if he goes to a Buffalo or Philadelphia Eagles team and he gets that bye. Obviously, he needs to take a prorated contract. Most of the contracts are broken down to where while we see 3 years, $60 million, that $20 million is actually prorated to a per game check. It's not $20 million he's making in a 365-day calendar year. So, yeah, you need to prorate him. You can't pay him for a full season to play the playoffs.
I have an opinion on how this plays. I think he's enjoying the Buffalo Bills, not the Cowboys, not the Giants, and there's some reason behind this. I think his camp, no matter how they slice it and cut it, is a little irked that Jerry, you made this point recently, was the guy who had the audacity and the testicular fortitude to call out the obvious that everybody knows. This isn't going to be an ass-kissing contest. We want to know if you can play. Buffalo, given the short window thing, and you had already alluded to the whole not having a number 2 thing, I think that Buffalo might be the ones that do it. I don't think there's going to be no multiple deal years on this thing. Next year in free agency, like I'm talking about, the new calendar year coming, I think that reopens the whole bidding thing again. Maybe Dallas gets him, maybe they don't. I don't think he's going to be a Cowboy. I still think he's going to be a Giant. I think it's going to happen next year. But once again, it truly matters on what the overall focus is. Because even if you brought back an Odell, where you kind of, the Giants are going to have the cap space to make it happen next year. The thing is, what is the Giants' approach? Do they want to bring in a veteran and then draft a young receiver? Because either way, you've got to draft a young receiver. But I do think that there's more to this with Odell. And quite frankly, I still think that he wants the New York limelight. Or I could see a deal where he stays in Buffalo on some years that still kind of suffices. It's upstate, but, he could still, do his New York City deal.
I don't think he cares about the whole Jerry Jones thing, honestly. Everyone knows that's who Jerry is. He's proven it year in and year out, so it's nothing new with Jerry. He's not signing a 1-year deal, and the reason why is because we're talking about a guy that has now had 2 torn ACLs to the same knee.
Yeah, but you got to understand something. He doesn't necessarily have the power. If the offer isn't there, the offer isn't there.
Well, then he doesn't sign.
So you're saying he's going to sit out and just miss the playoffs and don't go to nobody?
No way he risks another injury that is going to for sure terminate another contract for him.
You make a good point, but this is the other side of this. If he wants to get the money that he desires, he might have to take that chance to show that he still got it. And if he just sits and doesn't do anything, that is not the best way to be remembered, especially when you didn't work out for nobody and you're like, oh, he's already been quoted as saying, I want to come back for the playoffs. And then when you don't play, it almost looks like you're not being honest or even believing in your own abilities to play. And I'll be the first to admit that if I'm Jerry, if I'm Mara, if I'm any of these guys that runs these teams, I'm not exactly salivating over that because, quite frankly, I don't think he's ready.
He's not going to, because he already bet on himself before. He's not going to do it again. There's too many reasons why I just don't see him saying, yeah, okay, I'll sign a 1-year, $0.4 million contract to play week 18 for, it's week 18, your starters are not playing. Okay, I'll play 10 plays.
Not to mention the other part of this is that you have to give yourself sufficient time to learn the playbook. We're coming up on 40 seconds, Zappy. Anything you want to say on the way out?
No, dude, it's, this is going to be an exciting weekend of football, especially Sunday night football.
Absolutely. Going to be, this is the week that I think is going to truly separate and tell the story for pretty much anything and everything for that NFC and also possibly AFC races. For my good friend Mike Zappi, great show today, by the way. This was awesome. We'll see you soon. We're going to be doing our Week 15 preview. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the